You know, if you think that there's challenges to pastoring a church, try pastoring a church with your mother in it. That's my challenge. I mean, she was here this morning, and I'm just going to let you know a little secret. I actually haven't spoken to my mother in 2 years. Oh, we haven't had a falling out. I just don't like to interrupt her while she's talking. You bet I wouldn't have said that if she was here? Well, she was here the first service, and I said it, and she ran out of the building. I don't know where she went.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, this morning my message is entitled The Relentless Mother. And we want to take the day today to talk about motherhood. I think it's great that in our day and age we still take one day a year to honor the role of motherhood. Once you become a mother, you are a mom for the rest of your life. Does the role change? Yes. It doesn't matter how old you are, though, or how old your children are, you are always the mother, and that's just the way it's going to be. You know, if you think that there's challenges to pastoring a church, try pastoring a church with your mother in it. That's my challenge. I mean, she was here this morning, and I'm just going to let you know a little secret. I actually haven't spoken to my mother in 2 years. Oh, we haven't had a falling out. I just don't like to interrupt her while she's talking. You bet I wouldn't have said that if she was here? Well, she was here the first service, and I said it, and she ran out of the building. I don't know where she went. Moving right along, if you have a Bible with you, we're going to go into 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 1, and we're going to read the first 5 verses. Listen carefully. It says, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, according to the promise of life which is in Christ Jesus. To Timothy, my beloved son, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Lord. I thank God whom I serve with a pure conscience, as my forefathers did, as without ceasing I remember you in my prayers night and day, greatly desiring to see you, being mindful of your tears, that I may be filled with joy. This is where I'm going, verse 5. When I recall to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded is in you also. You know, the Apostle Paul gets a bad rap when it comes to women. There are people that have accused him of being a misogynist, a woman hater, or at the very least a sexist because of some of the things he wrote. But when you look at what he says here, he speaks about these two women in the most respectful and honoring ways possible. He credits Timothy, really the success of this young man, Timothy, he credits it to his mother, Eunice, and his grandmother, Lois. Now, let me sort of give you a little history on Timothy just for a moment here. He calls him his beloved son. He's not his literal son, his biological son. He's his spiritual son. And he was his most beloved and his most faithful disciple. And Timothy went on to become the leader, the pastor of the church in Ephesus, became one of these great men of God. And we know a little bit of the story here. Paul wrote this letter. This was his last letter that he wrote from prison just before he was beheaded when he was in Rome. And he wrote it to Timothy, his beloved son. And he talks to him about his mother and his grandmother. And the thing is, we actually know a little bit about this story because Paul met them when he was in Lystra on his first missionary journey in Acts chapter 16. He came into that city. God was doing many signs and wonders. And there was a family that was converted to Christ. It was Lois, the grandmother, Eunice, the mother, and Timothy, the son. And he was just a young man at the time. We also know from the scripture that Timothy's father, his biological father, was a Greek. He was neither a Christian nor a Jew. And in fact, the scripture tells us that out of deference to his father, he was not circumcised. Why that kind of information needs to be published for all people of all times to know, I'm not sure, but that's what the Bible used to do. And so we find that he was raised in the faith anyway, by his grandmother and by his mother. And Paul credits these two women for the kind of person that he became, one of the great leaders of the early church. And what I'm going to do this morning is I want to talk about the role of a motherhood, of a mother, and how important this role is and the kind of influence that she can, and not only can, but does have into the lives of her children. I'm going to use a word today, just one word to describe it, and that word is push. I think it completely describes motherhood. When you think push, isn't that what mothers do? They push. Isn't that how it all began when we think about it, ladies? The very first thing you did to become a mom was you pushed, right? Isn't that what happened in the birthing room? I was there. I remember. Did you have some nurse, some angry-looking nurse yelling at you? Push! Push! I remember it like it happened yesterday. I was one of the modern dads. I was in there. I wasn't out in the hallway smoking a cigar. I was in there. I was right in the thick of it. Let me tell you what I remember. I remember blood, sweat, tears. I remember screaming, crying, wailing, gnashing of teeth. And Kathy told me it was uncomfortable for her as well. You know what they're doing now? I do know this, that they've actually figured out a way to make it less stressful. And if a baby is born right under the water, it's less stressful on the mother, and it's less stressful for the baby. Now, it's terrifying for the rest of the people in the swimming pool. Let me talk about this word push for a moment and try to get back onto track. Motherhood begins with the first push, but then you're going to spend the rest of your life pushing. And what does push mean? Well, someone said that push means to pray until something happens, and that's one good definition of it. But I'm going to give you another one. I'm going to take the word push today, and I'm going to give you 3 points. You say, Mark, how are you going to do that? There's 4 letters. It's going to be a miracle. You just listen to this. The P stands, these are, I think, the 3 basic instincts of motherhood. The P stands for protection. The U stands for unconditional love. And the SH stands for shaping. See how I put them together like that? That's incredible. It's amazing. And so those are my 3 points today, the 3 basic instincts. The first basic instinct of motherhood is this, is a protective instinct. Mothers seem to have a far greater and stronger sense about protection of their young than the males do. In the animal kingdom, some males will actually eat their young. You know that. It's not the male bear that you need to fear, it's the female bear, and you all know this, the proverbial you don't get between the mother bear and her cub, because there's this tremendous protective nature in the animal kingdom. I look at Kathy and myself, and I know Kathy's always had a stronger protective sense than I have by a long shot. In fact, when our babies were born, she actually wouldn't let me hold them when they were little. It was quite a while. By the time I was allowed to hold them, they were, I think, 12, maybe 11. But by that time, they were too big, and they didn't want me to hold them. And she did not like to go away. She did not like to go away when our kids were little. And in fact, she stopped going away. She used to go on women's retreats and stuff like that with the church. But the problem was, and I'm pretty sure it was a coincidence, that every time she went away, one of our kids would end up in the hospital. It was just sort of like just one of those weird coincidences. There'd be a broken bone or stitches or some knocked out teeth or whatever. And I don't know why it always happened on my watch. And so she would come home and they say, where's so-and-so? I said, well, in the hospital. Or, you know, I know it's not as bad as it looks. You know, it's not as many stitches as you think. And I remember when she went away one weekend with the women, and my son, he was 4 years old, and he was out playing in the street. I guess that was partly my fault. And he was out playing in the street, and a bike came along and hit him and knocked him to the ground, and he broke his clavicle. And he didn't just fracture it, he broke it clean out. The x-ray, it was separated, it was sticking up like this. And of course, he was on the ground, he started crying. I went over there, I pulled him up, I said, now walk it off, now walk it off. Mom, we don't cry. Men in our family, we don't cry. Now walk it off, walk it off. He said, that really hurts. Walk it off, you'll be better. He says, my shoulder really hurts. I said, well, let's go out to the playground here. We'll hang on the monkey bars. That'll straighten it right out. Turns out it was broken completely in half. I had to take him to the hospital. That was not a great night when Kathy came home that night. And so, you know, do I seem like a bad father? Well, I'm not talking about fathers. I'm talking about how good mothers are today. And Kathy always had this strong sense of protection of our kids. In fact, she used to get accused of being overly protective of our children because she wouldn't let them go on sleepovers when they were younger. And of course, you know, that's like the biggest crime you can ever commit against a young child. But she had a good reason. When we look at our culture, and there is really a sickness in our culture, when we look at the level of sexual abuse that takes place, it's really unbelievable. And the stats now are saying that something like 25% of girls are abused and something like 10% of boys boys are abused. And here's the thing. It's not some creepy pedophile that you see a picture of in the newspaper. 90% of the time, it is friends or family. So it's not out there somewhere, some terrible, horrible person. It's some terrible, horrible person right within our homes, and right within our circles, and right within our families. And as I talk about this, you know, I know there's people in this room, probably hundreds of people in this room, that have faced this and had to deal with this in your own life, and you know what has happened. And so Kathy said, I would rather live with a couple of hours of disappointment on their part than a lifetime of disappointment if they ended up somehow being abused or violated in some way, and I'm not willing to expose my children to that. Did our kids like it? No, they didn't like it. And very rarely did they go off and spend nights with other places and places where they could not be taken care of and watched over. And see, our kids are too important. Our kids are too valuable to us. And I understood, you know, I was always happy to get rid of them for a night, but she of course, you know, wanted to protect them. You say, well, what am I supposed to do? Leave them in their room till they're 29? Actually, that's even worse. Because today you can get in as much trouble in your room, maybe more than outside of your room, because of the internet, because of the computer and kind of video games and these things going on. I mean, our kids are holed up in their bedrooms for hours on end, talking to who knows who about who knows what. And you don't know what's going on in their little brains and how they're being influenced and what kinds of things, because a lot of parents, let's just be honest, they're just plain clued out about it. They don't know what's going on today, and let me tell you something. The devil always takes the youngest, and he is after your children, and he's after the minds of your children, and they are not safe even at home. I'm going to step on some toes here today, as if I haven't already. I'm going to step on some toes today about video games. I think video games are the worst possible babysitter you could ever have. I don't see any children clapping. Let me tell you why, though. I haven't explained why. Because what happens is we, of course, like them because the kids are off, they're finally quiet, they're finally leaving us alone, and it all seems good and it all seems peaceful. And I'm not going to go on about computer game violence. I don't think your kids are going to become axe murderers or serial murderers just because they're playing video games. That debate goes on. I think they've missed the point. That's not the problem with video games. I'll tell you what the problem with video games are. It is proven, and the jury is in on this, is it produces compulsive and addictive and antisocial behavior. And they are creating video games for this purpose. They make them addictive on purpose. If you ask the children, is that video game addictive? They'll go, oh yeah, it's addictive, because I got to get to the next level. I've got to get to the next level. You say, well, what do you mean antisocial and compulsive behavior? You know what I'm talking about. If you talk to them when they're in the midst of a game, they won't even hear you, let alone answer you back. You call them for meals, they will miss the meals because they have been drawn into this isolated world. And, you know, a few hours of it isn't going to kill them. That's not the problem. We're not talking about a few hours. The average boy in Canada spends 13 hours a week on a video game. The average girl spends 10 hours a week. You know what you can do in 10 to 13 hours a week? You can learn an instrument or a language or both. But there are 5 million North American children who spend 40 hours or more a week on a video game. You know what you can do in 40 hours a week? You can earn a living. Exactly. You got it. This is an incredible amount of time. But I don't want you to miss, and I don't think there's this great evil in it. I'm just saying it's a crummy babysitter. And we've got to do a whole lot more than just let our kids be captured and entrapped in these games that seem like they're so harmless, but what they're doing is we're taking them out of real life. They are forfeiting real life for the virtual world. So I'm going to give you 3 quick things here in this point on protection. I'm going to give you 3 quick keys. The first one is this, is that you need to stay involved. This actually goes for mothers and fathers. We need to stay involved. You know, one of the things I love about this story of Jesus was his mother. And we see his mother there from beginning to end. When Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, who was there at the foot of the cross? Who remembers? His mother, Mary, was at the foot of the cross. She lived in Nazareth. What was she doing in Jerusalem? I'll tell you what she was doing in Jerusalem. She was part of the gang. She was part of the disciples, just like the rest of them, and she was there. You actually follow, and you see Jesus' mother in many of these situations. She was there at the end. She was also there at the beginning. Where did he begin his ministry? It was at Cana. They were at a wedding. That was his first miracle. What was his miracle? Who remembers? Turned the water into wine. And everybody says, I don't get that miracle. Out of all the miracles Jesus could have done, why did he turn the water into wine? I'll tell you why. His mother told him to, right? I've read the story. His mother told him to. What choice did he have? Mom said, I got to do it, got to do it. So we see Jesus' mother involved in his life from beginning to end. Didn't matter how old he was, she was there. And see, my challenge to you as mothers and as fathers is that we need to stay involved in our kids' lives. And one of the reasons why I say video games are so bad is because it builds this disconnect. And they go off into their little virtual world, and we're not involved with their life. And not to mention the amount of time they're wasting when they could be doing things. Kids that are young have a tremendous ability, way more than you do, to learn languages and instruments and learn things. They have these brains that just soak things up. And we could do much more with our kids. And I always challenge parents on this. I say, find out what your kids really like. Find out what they enjoy. Find out what their interests are, whether it be music or drama or dance or sports, and then make it your interest. Get involved in the lives of your kids. I tell fathers who have daughters, and if their daughters are into dance, and they say, well, I like baseball, I say, you should start liking dance. Because if you want to keep your daughter when she's a teenage girl, if you're involved in their life, then it'll all change. Now, of course, you know, in our situation with our kids are a bunch of jocks, the boys and the girls. And so we just tried to stay involved in what they did. And even as a pastor, you know, we spent a lot of time trying to go to the games and be there for them and cheer them on and be involved in their life, not disconnected, and be part of parents' committees and all of those things. And, you know, some of you, you know, sometimes you think I was off on a mission trip because I wasn't preaching on a Sunday. But in fact, I was at the city finals for the soccer is where I really was. And, you know, I believe in doing my job, and I wouldn't neglect my job as a pastor, but I have a job that's actually more important than you, and it's called my children. And my wife has a job more important than me and you, and that's called her children. So the first thing is this, folks. You've got to stay involved in your kids' lives. But the second thing is this. You've got to stay in touch. Got to stay in touch. Now, I know what the big challenge, because I've had teenage kids. We've gone through this. And we know what this is like. As they get into those teenage years, what happens is often a disconnect. Because they're involved with their world and they're involved with their friends and all these things, and we get disconnected and we don't know how to communicate with our kids anymore because we've somehow let that lapse and we haven't kept those relationships strong and we haven't stayed in touch with them. And then, of course, we become frustrated and all we do is yell at them, right? You know, your music's too loud, your clothes are too tight, your friends are all losers. All that stuff's true, by the way, but it's not good to just tell them that all the time. What you want to do is you want to be involved in ongoing discussions with your kids. And you can't just start when they're 18 or start when they're 15. You've got to keep the lines of communication open all the way along the journey. And when they hit that 18 and 20 range like kids do and their friends start going off to the bar and off to the clubs, of course it becomes an issue in your family, and it did in ours. And so we didn't just forbid them and say, you can't go there, we forbid you. I mean, they're old enough to go. But we would have the long discussions as to why we wouldn't want them to go. And we'd have the long discussions about how we'd like them to make the better choice and have peer pressure that works the other way to do the right thing instead of peer pressure to do the wrong thing. And that they could be a good influence. And we had those conversations. And it took hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. But we wanted our kids to make the right decisions because they wanted to, not because we wanted them to. But you know what that does? That takes communication. You've got to keep those lines open. I'm telling you that have young kids now, don't ever let it go. Don't ever lose that relationship you have now. You need it more when they're 15 and 18 than you even do now. It's so vitally important. And the last and the final thing is this. First is to stay involved. The second is stay in touch. And the third thing is to stay the course. And what I mean by that is that you need to be consistent in your own life. It's not good enough for you to tell your kids to do one thing and do something different yourself. You hear me on this? You can't do that do as I say, not as I do thing. That's malarkey. You have got to give them an example. Whatever you want them to do, you have to do yourself. You can't smoke and drink and cuss and gamble and not go to church and expect your kids to do differently. They're only as good as the example you give them. Your encouragement to them is only as good as what you model to them. And our example, we have to stay the course. And you have credibility when you will do it. And you have moral authority. But if you're not willing to do it, you have no moral authority to tell them to do something that you yourself are not willing to do. There's this story of this grade 3 teacher. She's got a little experiment for the kids. She's got 3 earthworms in 3 jars. And the first jar she fills with cigarette smoke, and the second jar she fills with alcohol, and the third jar just has air in it. And she drops a worm in each one of these jars and puts the lid on. An hour later, they come back, and the jar full of smoke, the worm is dead. The jar full of alcohol, the worm is dead. The jar with the air in it, the worm is still squiggling around in the bottom. She turns to the class and says, "What have we learned from this?" Little Johnny puts up his hand and says, "I know, if you smoke and drink, you'll never have worms." So the first thing, the P in the word push, is protection. That a mother's role is to protect her children. But the second thing, the U, stands for unconditional love. And it's amazing how a mother, no matter what a child gets into, no matter what bad choices a kid will make, a mother will always love. Sometimes far better than a father is able to do that. Why? Because God has instilled into a mother this sense of unconditional love. I mean, how many of you heard this expression, he's got a face that only a mother could love? Now, if you heard that personally, I feel sorry for you, frankly. How many remember Rodney Dangerfield? He used to talk about that. He said, "Hey, I was so ugly when I was born, the doctor slapped my mother. Hey, I get no respect. I was so ugly growing up that if my mother didn't tie a pork chop around my neck, the dog wouldn't play with me. Hey, I get no respect." I'm just doing that strictly for my own amusement, so thank you. Let me tell you a story this morning about unconditional love, and it's the story of Greg Louganis. Greg Louganis is probably one of the greatest diving board divers in history. And there was an amazing thing that happened. In 1984, he won the gold medal in the 10-meter platform and the 3-meter springboard. And then in 1988 at the Seoul Olympics, he went back to defend his title. Now there he was on the 3-meter board. They were in the trials before the finals. He was on the 3-meter board, and what he's doing in this picture here is he is doing a 2.5 reverse somersault. So that means that he approaches the board forward like he is, and you go up off the board, you jump forward, but you flip backwards in the pike position. So there he is, he's got perfect form, everything is going great, except he's a little bit too close to the diving board, and as he opened up, coming around his last somersault, his head hit the back of the board. As his head hit the back of the board, he fell limp into the water. He had cut open his head. There was blood in the pool. He swam out of the pool to discover that he had a gash in the back of his head that required 5 stitches, and he had a concussion. Now remember, he's in the trials. He's a long way from the finals. He's completely blown that dive. They stitched him up on the spot 22 minutes later with 5 stitches in his head and a concussion. He went back up on that board and he repeated that dive, nailed it, and got the highest score in Olympic history in the 3-meter springboard. He went on to win the gold medal both in the 3-meter and in the 10-meter, to becoming the first man in history to do double Olympics back-to-back with gold medals. Now, of course, everybody was interested in this story. Some of you remember this. This was a great story. And the interviewer was interviewing him and asked him this question. There you are with 5 stitches in your head, with a concussion, with a headache. What was going through your mind as you were standing on that board preparing to do that same dive again? He said, "This is what I was thinking." He was thinking, no matter what happens, I always know this, that my mother will always love me. That's what he said. That he knew his mother would always love him. And that provided the motivation for him to go and nail that dive. Now, of course, if you don't know the rest of the story, you won't completely understand that. Because he went on and he said when he was younger, he had a particularly poor tournament competition, and he was really upset with himself, and his mother bawled him out and said, "Look, Greg," she said, "I don't come here to watch you win. I come here to watch you dive. And I don't care if you win or lose. Just do your very best, and I will always love you," she said. Now, here's why there's more to this story. Greg was not actually her natural child. He was abandoned at 8 months of age and was adopted by this mother and his father. And he grew up in this home with all kinds of different conflicts. When he was a teenager, he beat up this mother and ended up in juvenile hall. He was arrested and ended up in juvenile hall. He was raped at knife point by another man. He ended up in the gay lifestyle and eventually became HIV positive. He came out on Oprah and told the world about all this and the struggles and the difficulties and the decisions and course that he had taken in life. Throughout all of those things that I just mentioned, his mother never stopped loving him. Because that's what unconventional love is, or unconditional love, rather. That no matter what they do, whatever choices they make, no matter what calamity or tragedy befalls them, they're always going to be loved. And even this man who beat his own mother up still loved him. And so as he stood on that diving board that day, the one thing that motivated him to go on to that gold medal was the fact that he knew no matter whatever happened in his life, his mother will always love him. That's unconditional love. So the P in push stands for the protective instinct, the U stands for unconditional love, and the SH stands for shaping. You know, it's amazing the ability that a mother has to shape their children. Maybe more than a father in some ways. If you look historically, you will see, just like our text of Eunice and Lois, you will see that mothers have a profound influence on directing the lives of their children. We heard from Napoleon Bonaparte, who said this. He said, the future destiny of a child is in the work of a mother. All of you in this room would recognize the name Pablo Picasso, the great painter. He said, my mother was always a voice of encouragement to me. She told me that if I became a soldier, I would end up a general. She said if I chose to be a monk, I'd probably end up as the Pope. And he said, instead, I became a painter, and I ended up a Picasso. A little bit self-centered, no doubt. I've probably told you the story about my grandmother. My grandmother had two sons, my uncle and my father, and she only wanted her sons to do two things. She wanted a doctor and a lawyer. And when my uncle and father were growing up in her household, she always told them, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer. Do you know what my uncle and my father became? Doctor and a lawyer? No, a garbage man and a gas jockey. No, yeah, a doctor and a lawyer. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, that's exactly what they became. And here's what's funny about this story. Because my father, my whole life, I always remember him saying this. He always said, you know, I don't know why I became a lawyer. I didn't even really want to become a lawyer. For some reason, I ended up a lawyer. For the life of me, I can't figure out why I became a lawyer. Actually, I know why. Your mother wanted you to be a lawyer. And she shaped him and stirred his life, and he became a little bit what she spoke into him. And you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Because I think you as a parent, you as a mother, know more your kids' strengths and weaknesses than anybody else in this world. Even more than them. And for the life of me, I can't understand why parents just let their kids bump through life and try to find their way in life. And well, he's just trying to find himself. Really? And you expect that to go somewhere? Why don't you invest a little bit of direction in his life? You know what he or she is like. You know what he or she's strengths and weaknesses and gifts are. Why don't you kind of stir them? And let me say something else to you parents. You need to put your money where your mouth is. Why wouldn't you invest in your kids as well? Invest in their education and help them. Not only direct them, but help them. Don't leave them to their own devices. They have no idea what they're doing. That's what I've discovered. But their mom knows. Ask mom, she knows. Let me close with one final story here today. Everyone here knows Denzel Washington, the actor. And after he made it big on television, you remember, as a doctor, he came home and he walked in the house one day. This is what he said. He was telling the story on a late night talk show. And he came in, he walked in the door and he said, look at me, I'm a star. You know what his mother said? Oh, please. Do you have any idea how many people have been praying for you and for how long? Now grab that bucket and grab that squeegee and go wash the windows. You know what he did? He grabbed the bucket and grabbed the squeegee and went and washed the windows. You know what? You're not a big shot in your mother's eyes, and you never will be. But your mother has so much to offer you. And you as mothers that are in this room today, you have the most important job. More important than any career you could ever take. God has entrusted you with the most precious things in your life, and that's your children. And He has called you to this task to give them a little push, to be that protective person for them, to unconditionally love them, and to shape their lives to become everything that they are meant to become. And then you will be that Proverbs 31 woman that says this, your children will rise up and call you blessed, and your husband also, and he will praise you.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.